All right, this week we're going to be talking about why quartz watches are better than automatics. Wait, guys, no. Come on, hear me out. Give me a chance here. Okay, this week we're going to be doing something a little bit different, and rather than me just reviewing a watch, we're going to talk about some of the differences between quartz and automatic or automatic mechanical watches, and specifically why I'm choosing to build my collection primarily out of quartz watches rather than automatic or mechanical watches. Now, contrary to what I said in the introduction, quartz watches are not just flat out better than automatic watches. There's definitely an argument to be made on both sides, and most people would probably say that automatic mechanical watches are better to build a collection around than quartz watches. But from a budget collecting standpoint, I get kind of limited in what I can afford and what I can buy, and that's probably the primary reason I'm going more with quartz watches. But in addition to that, I think there's some other really good reasons for using quartz watches, and I want to talk about some of that and some of the challenges that I found or problems that I found with automatic mechanical watches as I was doing some research. So I've got two watches here to kind of stand in as examples today. So this is a Seiko SNK803, which I just reviewed. This is an automatic watch. And that means that this watch does not have a battery. So this watch is completely mechanically powered. There's a spring inside that gets wound. And so that's what it means by a mechanical watch. Rather than being battery operated or electrically powered, this watch is mechanical. There's little gears, there's little springs, there's things that move, and it has this cool case back that you can kind of see in and see all the amazing machinery that goes on the inside. And I think that a mechanical watch is just an amazing piece of machinery. It's an amazing, almost work of art. One of the coolest things that I think humans have created, and I'm just amazed every time I look at the case back and see all that's going on inside this watch. And that's why mechanical watches are so collectible, because of that cool factor, because of that kind of romantic, historical angle to them. But they're not without their problems. So chief among them is that they're more expensive than quartz watches, but they're also more difficult to maintain. They're not as accurate, so a quartz watch will be more accurate than a mechanical one. For quartz watch I have here, this is kind of a fashion watch. This is a Nixon Ranger 44, so this is actually a little bit newer. I reviewed the 45 as the first video on this channel, but this is a new one that I picked up. Comparable cost to the Seiko that I wound up paying for. Both of their retail costs are pretty similar. I got both of them at pretty good discounts. But kind of pound for pound, I think you're getting more money with the the quartz watches than you would get with the Seiko. The Seiko, they had to really skimp on the band, I think, is kind of a really low quality one, whereas this one they went the opposite. This is actually one of the nicest bands that I have. It's on a Horween leather band that it comes on. Really nice build quality, good solid watch. But this is a quartz watch, so it has a battery in there. And obviously the downside of that is that every 2 or 3 years you're going to have to change the battery on the watch. But yeah, let's go ahead and start breaking down some of the differences between a quartz movement and an automatic movement, and again, why I think there's some advantages to a quartz movement. So obviously the first is cost, and I've mentioned that a couple times already. But from a budget watch collecting standpoint, like if you want to do a watch collection, that means you're going to be buying multiple watches, and if you're buying multiple automatic mechanical watches, that's going to be more expensive than buying quartz ones, especially if you want to start looking at different complications like a chronograph watch. An automatic mechanical chronograph is way more expensive than a quartz one. So if you want to look at a chronograph, for me, I'd want to go with a Quartz one first. And when I say first, that's kind of the other point is I'm sort of really new at this hobby, so I don't know what I like. I don't know if I want to invest in an expensive automatic mechanical chronograph. I'd much rather buy a Quartz chronograph first and wear that for a while and see how much I use it, how much I like it, how much I enjoy it, and then from there I can base that decision. So that's the big thing. So by having a lower cost, starting my collection with Quartz watches, I'm able to really test out what kind of watches I want and what kind of watches I like, and then from there I might be able to make a better decision. Say, yeah, I really like, divers might be an example. Or, so far I've really enjoying aviation style watches. So I might be looking at, looking at a nice mechanical automatic aviation piece and start saving up my money to get that. But I wouldn't know that unless I had been able to try different watches first. So as a beginning collector, I think starting with Quartz watches allows me to try a much wider range of watches without kind of making that mistake of putting all my money into a watch that maybe I'd find out I'm not really going to be able to wear very often. So that's one, the cost. The maintenance is another big thing that I didn't really realize. When I was starting to look at automatic watches, I thought, the great thing about them is you don't have to change the battery. So, you just get it and you wear it and it works forever and you don't have to worry about it from there. But that's actually not the case. It turns out that automatic watches need to be serviced on a regular basis. Every, they say, 5 to 10 years, you're supposed to send your watch in for servicing. And that can cost hundreds of dollars to get the watch serviced. And so, depending on the amount of money you paid for the watch, it might be cheaper to buy a whole new watch than to get it serviced. But again, one of the biggest things that drew me to an automatic watch in the first place was the idea that I could kind of keep it forever and it would be an investment that I could invest in. So the idea of, some people I've heard that, like this kind of watch, for instance, this Seiko SNK803, it only costs, I think about $80 on Amazon, but to have it serviced would probably be close to that. So most people would say, well, a watch like this probably wouldn't be worth servicing unless it had like a real sentimental attachment to it, because, by the time you get it serviced, other things would be scratched and scuffed and you might as well just spend the money and buy a whole new one. But to me, that sort of defeats the whole purpose of why I would want an automatic in the first place, which would be, this longevity of it, that it would be something that I'd buy and keep using. And, even the idea of passing it on to like my kids or my grandkids, that was one of the things that really drew me to automatic watches or mechanical watches in the first place. So that service cost was something I didn't really understand or anticipate in the beginning like that. The other thing that I think once I started thinking about it more, and kind of the one of the interesting things I think about collecting automatic mechanical watches, specifically automatic versus hand wound, which is what the most mechanical watches are nowadays. The automatic movement is just an amazing idea. It's like such a cool step in horology. When we figured out, when watchmakers figured out how to make a watch that basically never needed to be wound. Because obviously the drawback to a hand wound watch would be if you forgot to wind it, you would look down later and you wouldn't know what time it was. It would be completely off, and you'd have to try and figure out. You'd have to go find a clock and reset it and set the time and the date and everything all over again, and then wind it and make sure you didn't forget. The automatic watch did away with that problem because it's based on the movement of your hand. It's got a little rotor in there, a weight that spins as you move it, and that winds the watch on its own. So as long as you're wearing an automatic watch, it never needs adjusting, really. I mean, it does, because they're not as accurate as Quartz, so they do lose or gain time, so they would need a little bit of adjusting from time to time, but it'll basically keep working. And that's like so amazing. That's like incredible that you can have a watch that basically powers itself, ideally forever. And in that sense, it would almost be better than a Quartz watch because it doesn't need the battery change. It just keeps working. But obviously that doesn't work as soon as you start building a collection on these. If you have, say more than 3 or 4 automatic mechanical watches that you're rotating out every day, what that means is, you put on the first watch and take it off to put on the next one. 3 or 4 days later, you get back to that first one again. It's inevitably going to be out of power because they only have usually like a 40 to 60 hour power reserve. So once it gets past that, it's going to stop, and it's really no better than a hand wound. You're not using the automatic technology for what it was used for, or what it was created for. It was this idea that you wouldn't have to wind it, but if you're rotating it through, you're basically going to have to wind it and set it every time you switch it and put it back on. If you have maybe 2 automatic watches, so maybe you have like a daily watch and a dress watch or something like that, and you rotate through them, yeah, sure, then the power reserve, that's where the amazing invention of the power reserve will show its usefulness, because the watch will keep ticking while you've got the other one on, and that's great. You're using it. I like the idea of using the technology for what it was made for, but it seems to me like if you're just collecting a whole bunch of automatic mechanical pieces, you're not really using for what they're used for. You might as well just have a whole bunch of hand-wound uses, or hand-wound watches, because basically you're hand-winding, or in this case, shaking, because this one doesn't have hand-winding. You've got to use only the automatic movement, which you can charge by shaking it. But basically you're doing that every single time you put the watch on. Again, I figured you might as well just have a collection of hand-wound watches at that point, because you're effectively never using the automatic movement for what it's for, unless you're wearing it for more than like a day at a time. So that was the thing. So I started thinking, well, do I really want a whole collection of automatic watches that I'm not really going to be using the automatic function for what it's used for? I'm going to be having to spend money to keep them serviced from time to time. That's going to be very expensive. If I did want to kind of get around the idea of having to wind them every time, I could invest in watch winders, but that costs a lot of money too. So now I'm investing more money just to have something spin the watch for me, because I'm not wearing it, because I've got a different one on, because I've got a collection. So to me, for all of those reasons, I really started gravitating towards building a watch collection based on quartz pieces first. And again, kind of where I'm going with that, as I've kind of hinted this before, is I want to figure out like a good, like perfect automatic mechanical piece for me to get, because the thing that really does draw me to them is the idea that, despite the service costs and things, if you do have one good automatic mechanical watch, and if you keep it serviced, this thing can last for generations. Like this is something I could pass on to my children, to my grandchildren, great-grandchildren even. And that to me is so cool, to think that my kids or grandkids could have kind of this little thing that I owned and still use it. A quartz watch, you can't really do that. They're great for what they are, but because it's an electronic piece, because there's electronics in there that tend to degrade over time, they're probably not going to last more than about 30 years, is what I've the research that I've done. And so to me, that tells me this is this quartz one, as much as I enjoy it now, it's not something that I'll really be able to hand down to my kids or their kids, because by the time they're grown up, probably the electronics inside this thing are going to degrade and go away. So that's kind of what I want out of my collections. I want a collection of quartz watches that allow me to kind of experience all different kinds of watches. And then, I'll be wearing those kind of on a daily basis and that sort of thing. But I want to have one piece in my collection that, I want to find out that's something that I can attain, that I can purchase, and then take care of, and have that be kind of the cornerstone and highlight of my collection. And that's something that I can pass down to my kids, to my grandkids, whatever, and in kind of the hopes that that thing will kind of keep going down the line. And to me, that's, I think, one of the most beautiful things about a mechanical watch, is that idea that this thing, if you take care of it, and it costs money to take care of it, it is an investment, but if you can afford to do that, the thing can basically last forever. It can just keep, you can just keep using it, and it's this it's this mechanical thing. It doesn't rely on batteries. It doesn't require electricity. It's kind of an old-fashioned thing, and yet it will outlast the quartz watches. It'll outlast the electronic ones. So to me, that's really cool, and that's something that kind of where I want to go with my collections. I want to have that one piece, that this is like something that I've thought about, that I've tried out different watches, and I found out the style that I want, and then I've been able to get it, and then I can take care of it. I can afford to keep this one watch serviced and in good condition, and then I can pass it down to my kids, and hopefully they can do the same with their kids, and who knows how long it'll last. So to me, that's just an amazing thing about mechanical watches, and one of the reasons I definitely want to have one always in my collection. I have a huge appreciation for what they are, but from a practicality standpoint, from a cost standpoint, I'm probably going to have more quartz watches in my collection than mechanical ones, because I don't have the budget to invest in a whole collection of automatic mechanical watches and paying for the servicing costs and the box or the or the watch winders, and all the other costs associated with it. So that's why I think for me, in my collection, quartz watches largely make more sense than mechanical ones. But that doesn't mean I have anything against the mechanical watches. I think if money were no object, that's where I would go to. But again, because I'm on a budget, because I am watch collecting on a budget, the Quartz watches have a greater, they just make more sense for me. So what do you guys think? Do you think that Quartz watches are, superior to automatic ones? Would you build a collection with mostly Quartz watches, or are you the kind of guy that's really going in the automatic ones? And if you are someone who's collecting automatic watches, what are some of the challenges that you've faced? Do you think that the criticisms that I've leveled against automatic watches are valid ones? Or maybe, because I'm really new at this, so I don't have firsthand experience. This is mostly just doing research. So I could be off. So if you have the personal experience with automatic watches and you found, hey, most of those criticisms don't really hold water, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear. But thanks for watching this week, guys. Really appreciate you guys tuning in. Do me a favor and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed the content. We're going to try and keep this going. Every once in a while I'll be doing some just talks about watches and watch collecting and some of the things that I've learned from doing research, in addition to keeping up the reviews and looking at other watches. And yeah, again, we're trying to build that ultimate watch collection, one cheap watch at a time. But as we mentioned, I think before, when I say cheap watches, I don't mean like actually cheap watches, like things that are going to break or really easy. I'm interested in things that are a good value, and that's what I'm going to be looking for, and hopefully being able to share with you as well. So thanks for tuning in this week, and yeah, we'll see you guys next week.